Good morning, everybody. Sorry I can't see you all. It's a bit different doing things this way, isn't it? I work as project manager for the D2N2 Teaching Partnership 1 day a week. The other 4 days a week I work for Nottinghamshire County Council as Children's Workforce Development Manager, but I'm also involved in their social work recruitment as well. And I've been involved with the partnership since it started back in 2016. Although only project manager for about a month, I know a lot about the partnership's work and what we've been doing over the last few years. So I've been invited to come along just to talk a little bit about what we've done and what we're looking to do going forward, but also to talk a little bit about our investment in health and wellbeing, which I think in the current climate might be quite a useful thing to touch on. Perhaps if I can, am I okay to share screen, Lynn?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay? Right, just bear with me while I do that then. Okay, can everybody see that all right?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, thanks. It's very tricky not being able to see your audience. Okay, if I just go forward to the first slide. So a little history. Back in 2015, when I came into post with Nottinghamshire, we were having some conversations with our local partners, with the NHS, with our universities, with other neighbouring local authorities, about how we could work together and how we might do that, what could we achieve together, what would be the benefits of doing that. We were also aware at that time that the government, the DFE, were setting up teaching partnerships across the country. And whilst we didn't get funding for the first wave, we did put a bid in for the second wave of teaching partnerships, and we were successful. So we already had an acknowledgement that we'd got some common ground, we'd got things that we could do together. Getting that funding actually gave us the opportunity to put those ideas into action. And so we formed the partnership. We had 4 local authorities, so there was Nottinghamshire, Nottingham City, Derbyshire and Derby City. Our 3 universities, Nottingham University, Nottingham Trent, and a little further down the road, Derby University joined the partnership as well. We've got 3 third sector organisations and an NHS trust, so 11 partners altogether. And as a collective, we saw ourselves as becoming a social work academy of excellence, and had a real investment in making sure that our social work training for students and for our existing social workers was at a good standard. And the DFE had set out some guidelines for the teaching partnerships at the start, and there were 3 main goals they'd got in mind, which were good placements for students, support for practice educators, and input from practicing social workers and people with lived experience into student social worker training. And that was really important for us, making sure that students had got that sense of the real world as part of their training, so that they were really prepared for practice. So putting a little bit more meat on the bones about what that meant for us as a partnership, we did feel it was important that students got some statutory experience. They really needed to have that as part of their placements. And we've tried where we can to make sure people have at least 2 placements where they're getting statutory experience, and that's been a commitment from the start. From the point of view of their career development, that's really important skills they need to have. We've done quality audits of our placements, so we make sure we keep an eye on what do students think about placements, are they getting what they need? And the flip side of that is making sure that our practice educators are being supported in their work with students as well, So those quality audits have been really important. And we introduced what we called a practice learning system. And whilst I haven't got the time to go through all of it today, one of the important bits of that was around getting our social work teams on board with having students on placement. It can feel like it's a bit of extra work. And what we wanted them to see was actually what students bring to a team in terms of just rejuvenating the practice a little bit, coming in with new ideas around research and different ways of practicing social work. It's actually like a breath of fresh air for the team having a student come in. So we wanted to underline that with our teams, but also to get people to realise that those students there on placement were potentially future colleagues, people who might come and work in that team when they finish the final placement. So we wanted to shift the mindset within our teams to actually embrace having a student and seeing the value of that. And again, that fed back into our reviews and our audits, making sure that that was working for our students. I guess the other thing to acknowledge is that, as if we didn't know, it's been a really difficult year to actually be a student social worker. And being able to provide appropriate placements that give those students the right experience has been a real challenge for everybody in the partnership. And we've worked really hard as a partnership to try and make sure that those students get what they need. And it's very difficult when you're doing that virtually as a practice educator and as a team manager with a student in your team. And it's been really difficult for students as well, because they've not only lost their peer support from their other students, they've also lost that support from teams who are not in the room with them. So it's been a very difficult world for them to come into, and we have tried to support them through that. One of the things that I've noticed being involved with social work recruitment at Nottinghamshire, the standard of students coming through from their placements into jobs has been really strong. It's been good. And I guess we've been surprised at how well they've grasped practice and run with it in this new world, and have come across really well at interviews. So whilst there probably are still some gaps in experience that we need to address, their knowledge and their experience has been sufficient to get them into jobs. It's not been a barrier. And we have looked at our ASYE programmes to make sure we cover off some of those gaps when they do join us. So that's been quite reassuring that students have come through and have been able to secure jobs in spite of what has been a virtual placement. One of the things we do within our employer organisations, we also offer student support with job applications. It's very daunting if you're applying for a job, you're not quite sure how to sell yourself, what skills do they need to know about. So we all as employers do a bit of hand-holding through our recruitment processes, and that has paid dividends as well. It's helped us boost our student recruitment significantly. So that has been an investment that's been good for the students, but also good for us as employers. Practice educators, we needed to boost our numbers of practice educators to start with so that we could provide the number of placements that were needed. But we then needed to make sure we got the right support in place for that larger cohort of practice educators. So the partnership had for a number of years funded roles that were practice education leads, and they would be the support mechanism for our practice educators. Any issues that they had would be fed back into the practice educator leads. They would feed back to the partnerships board or to the exec group, and we could then look at what needed to be put in place for our practice educators. And that's worked really well, so that we were keeping in touch with what's going on at the front line, what their issues are. We lost the funding for that element of our project team just over a year ago, but those practice educator leads are now embedded in their organisations, so we've still got that support mechanism there. And the other element of support for our PEs was around practice development programme, making sure that we built in service user and carer feedback to their training, to training for work-based supervisors and so on, and also making sure that that was part of the curriculum at the universities as well. So that's been quite an important underpinning area of work for us. I'm sorry, I've flicked on too many there. So involvement of people with lived experience. As I mentioned at the start, we've got 2 service user organisations that work with us, and they are involved directly with our university admissions, so they're on the panels. And again, that gives them and us an opportunity just to gauge whether those coming into social work training have got the right aptitude and the right interpersonal skills to take on that role. So it's useful to have service user feedback on that. And they're also represented on the TP board and executive group. They feed into curriculum, so they go in and do talks for students at universities, and they come out to employer organisations and talk to our existing social workers. So we do have quite a lot of engagement with our service user organisations, and I think going forward we'd like to increase that engagement more. So there's still some work to do there, I think. And that's all good stuff, and we've been working hard to keep that partnership activity going over the last few years. But we have to put it in the context of social work as a sector, and that type of work takes its toll, and we have to acknowledge that. Generally speaking, we know that there are always worries as a social worker about getting it wrong. You don't hear a lot of press stories about when they get it right. So there's always that anxiety about, I might just miss something, what's going to happen if I don't keep on top of this. Caseloads can rise and fall and put pressure on people. Conflicting priorities, which of my urgent cases is going to be a priority today. And levels of stress-related absence are well known, and that seems to be the norm across the sector, and we know there are those pressures. When you add on to that a layer of being a social worker in a pandemic, that's a whole other ball game, and staff have had to deal with home working, homeschooling, trying to keep things safe virtually. Social work training has had to be virtual, and there's been that loss of being with the team, and that's all impacted on practice and taken its toll. And as a partnership, we recognise this, and actually what we had done a while back was set up a website with a wellbeing hub within it. And I think now, probably more than ever, that is a resource that we want to tap into. So a little bit about the hub. The reason we set it up was because we were aware of the level of stress-related absence across our workforces. And whilst each of our organisations has got a good support infrastructure that staff can resort to if they need to, the statistics suggested that perhaps staff weren't doing that. They weren't talking to their managers. They weren't seeking help necessarily when they needed to, for a range of reasons. And that might have been about feeling uncomfortable talking to your manager or not wanting to bring your personal life into work, and that's understandable. But we did feel that staff needed somewhere to go that was outside of work, but actually gave them some appropriate signposting when they needed it. So, as well as having a website, we built a virtual health and wellbeing hub. And the link to this is at the end of the presentation, so you'll have that to have a look later. But we wanted to have sections within that wellbeing hub that appeal to different audiences. So there is a section on support for me, on support for colleagues and friends. So you might go on there because you know somebody who's got an issue and you want to try and find some support for them. And there's a section for managers who might want to find some support resources for their teams. Depending on what's happened with that team, there might have been an issue with a family, a child death, or a death of a colleague. and team managers might want some resources to help support that team through that situation. So we've got those different sections across the hub, and within the support for me and support for colleagues section, we've got a range of subsections: mental health, relationships, parenting, finances, and so on. As many things as we could think might be issues for our social workers, just as human beings having to live in the real world. And we felt that this would at least give them some initial signposting. So within each of those sections, you'll find links to support organisations. There might be some TED Talks, some short videos, but at least it gives people somewhere to go, or a link that they can forward to a friend if they need to. One of the things we do underline across the hub is that it is important to talk to somebody at work if you can. So we do flag that up, and I think there was an anxiety when we set this up that staff wouldn't come and talk to their managers, wouldn't talk to their colleagues, and managers were very keen to know if staff have got an issue so that they can support them through that. So to alleviate that, we have put information on there about the support that's available within organisations. One of the things that we were mindful of was that when staff go onto their intranet, you don't always find what you want when you type in your search words. And that can be very frustrating if you're a bit stressed and you're needing to find some support, and actually, you can't find it. So we have a page within the hub that actually gives some very clear instructions on this is what to type into the search in your intranet to get your support infrastructure information, which should alleviate a little bit of that stress and frustration when you go on the intranet, you can't find what you need. So we do flag that up to make sure that practitioners know where to go within their organisation, and we do encourage them to talk to their managers if they can. We are in the process of doing some website improvements. We've just had a little bit of funding, and we haven't had a chance to really revamp the site since we created it in 2018. So I would say there's a little bit of construction work going on at the moment. We're trying to keep as much of it live as we can while we work in the background, but there may just be a few links that are not quite right at the moment, so bear with us. We're working on it through till about the beginning of May. We're adding in some new CPD sections, there'll be some new links on there, and some new resources for practice educators as well. So it's a work in progress, but it is live and available for you, but just to make you aware that that is going on. I guess really that's as much as I have to say about the partnerships work. And I just wanted to leave with you a couple of little mantras that we've picked up along the way. One of the things we did back in 2018 was a series of CPD days for our staff, and actually it wasn't necessarily a CPD day. We called them Looking After Number One, and they were events aimed at our social workers and were completely about them. It was about them looking after themselves and how to do that, how to relax, how to build your resilience, how to deal with the pressures of being a social worker. So they were very much days for them. It wasn't about practice, theories, it was just about looking after them. And we managed to clear all of the tickets for those events. There were 100 tickets at each event, and they went in 3 days. And what that said to us was there's a real appetite from staff to have that self-care resource given to them. We haven't had a chance to do those events again since, and obviously this last year we've definitely not been able to do it. But I do feel that's something that would be really useful to pick up on as we come out of this. And I'd like to think that we could do a couple more of those events later this year if we're allowed to. So I know there's an appetite out there for this, and I think it is important just to take from today that we do need to look after ourselves. We're all part of a team, you know, part of a service, and that thing of I am because we are. We've all come through this together, and it's been a very difficult year, but we've done it because we're part of a team, part of a group of other people, a community of practice. And the same goes for the partnership, really. We've had to come through this year as a partnership, and we wouldn't have done it on our own. We've done it because we've worked together. So I think really, you know, our ethos as a partnership ties in quite well with the theme for your day. There are some links in the presentation. A couple of things that you might find useful. Obviously, there's our Health and Wellbeing Hub. The Self-Care Psychology website is well worth a visit. There are some really good resources on there around self-care. The Student Social Work Hub, that's also got some really good stuff on there. And there is a BASWA site with COVID-19 support information. And just for a lighter moment, I have put a link to the Museum of Happiness, which is also well worth a visit if you'd be interested. So that is me. I think I've got about 3 or 4 minutes to spare there. All right. Are there any questions while we're still in the room?
Just to say thanks, Liz. I think we've got some technical problems with Liz, but if you can hear us, Liz, thanks very much. And we'll consider that the end of the session. So for those of you attending the next one, you might want to leave and have a break before your next session. Thank you all. Bye.